Welcome to Fluent Daily, the English listening channel for advanced learners at B2 and C1 level. Every episode features a rich, flowing conversation in natural English on a topic that is genuinely worth thinking about: history, psychology, science, philosophy, and more. There are no simplified sentences here, no slow speech, no vocabulary drills. Just real English spoken naturally on ideas that matter. This is Fluent Daily. Let's get into it.
Today we have a great story, so let's get started right now. I want to ask you, the person listening to this right now, a question. It seems, incredibly simple on the surface, but it is actually the most complex, fiercely debated puzzle you will ever try to solve in your entire life. Are you ready? Here it is. Who are you, really?
Yeah, that is, it's the kind of question that could induce a mild existential panic, right? Especially if you think about it for too long.
Oh, totally. Because, the default assumption most of us carry around is that our identity is this hidden object. Like, we treat it like there's a true core buried deep inside our chest.
Right, like an excavation project?
Exactly. Like, our job in life is to go on some grand vision quest, dig it up, dust it off, and just be like, there I am, I found me.
Yeah, and the implication there is that your identity is fixed,
Yeah.
that it's structural and it has permanence.
Right. And, for this deep dive, we are basically taking a massive sledgehammer to that idea.
We really are. We pulled together just a mountain of empirical research for this.
Yeah, spanning from, classic 1950s developmental psychology to the cognitive revolutions of the late 20th century, all the way into modern digital sociology. And, the overarching mission here is to completely dismantle this architecture of the self.
Because the science shows that your identity is not some fossil waiting to be unearthed. It's really not.
No, it is a dynamic, continuously evolving narrative that you are actively writing, in real time. And it's heavily influenced by the people and the environments around you.
And that shift, from viewing identity as a discovery to viewing it as a construction, it changes absolutely everything about how we understand human behavior.
It really does. But to really grasp how we manage this whole construction product today, we first kind of have to look back, right? At the framework that taught us to obsess over identity in the first place.
Exactly. We need to go back to the mid-20th century. We really have to talk about Erik Erikson.
Let's do that, because I think a lot of this modern anxiety about finding ourselves has a very specific historical origin point. So who is Erikson?
So Erikson is foundational. He was a developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst who essentially gave the modern world the vocabulary for this entire conversation.
Right. He's the guy who coined the term identity crisis, isn't he?
He is, yeah. And that phrase is so deeply embedded in our culture now.
Oh, yeah. We talk about midlife crises, quarter-life crises, all of it. But Erikson was really focused on one specific demographic at the time, right?
He was. His most influential work centered squarely on adolescence. And context is really crucial here.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Well, before the mid-20th century, the concept of a teenager as a distinct psychological and cultural demographic didn't really exist. Not in the way we understand it today, anyway.
Right. You were a child, and then you just went to work, and suddenly you were an adult.
Exactly. But the post-war economic boom created this buffer period. Suddenly, young people actually had time.
They were in school longer. They had disposable income.
They weren't immediately thrown into the factory or the farm. Yeah. So Erikson observes this brand new buffer period, and he proposes that human life develops in 8 distinct psychosocial stages.
Okay, 8 stages.
Right. And he argued that the central task, the real defining conflict of adolescence, was identity versus role confusion. He described this period as a psychodynamic crucible.
Okay, wait. I want to pause on psychodynamic crucible because that sounds intense. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, think of a crucible as a container, right, where metals are heated to incredibly high temperatures to burn off impurities and forge a new alloy.
Right.
Erikson viewed adolescence as that container. You have a developing brain, a changing body, and suddenly society just places all these disparate options right in front of you.
Like career paths, political ideologies, moral frameworks.
And social cliques, exactly. You have to choose.
And so the crisis is just the friction of trying to melt all those options down into one solid, cohesive thing.
That was the theory, yeah. Erikson believed that the successful resolution of this crisis resulted in a synthesized, stable self.
So you look inward, you weather the storm of your teenage years, and you emerge with this locked-in identity.
Right, and you carry that stable self forward into adulthood.
So under that old model, the goal is permanence. Which, I mean, that brings us back to my analogy of the excavation, or actually another way to look at it, it's like sculpting a block of marble.
I like that analogy.
Right, you spend your teenage years chipping away at all the excess stone, the awkward phases, the bad haircuts, the weird music tastes, until you reveal the masterpiece underneath.
And once the statue is finished, it goes on a pedestal and it doesn't change.
Exactly. But that's wrong, isn't it?
It is. The marble metaphor captures Erickson's phenomenological approach perfectly, which is an internal, solitary process of revealing a permanent form. But contemporary psychology and sociology have moved far away from that model.
Right. Today's research is fiercely empirical, and it reveals a process that is highly socially situated.
Yes. Meaning, you don't just figure out who you are by sitting in a dark room contemplating your own navel.
You need other people.
You absolutely need other people. The modern consensus is that identity is continuously negotiated. It operates on multiple levels simultaneously.
Like what levels?
Well, you have your personal identity, your relational identity, like how you are as a spouse or a friend, and then your collective identity, which encompasses your nationality, your religion, your profession.
And I'm guessing those levels do not always play nice with each other.
Oh, they definitely do not.
Ah.
Sometimes they violently clash.
So if the whole marble statue metaphor is completely obsolete, what replaces it? Because as I was reading through the cognitive research for this, it struck me that a much more accurate model for modern identity is actually a Wikipedia page.
A Wikipedia page. Okay, let's pull that apart. How does that map onto the social negotiation of identity?
Well, think about how Wikipedia actually works, right? A page is never truly finished. There is no final draft.
Right, it's always being updated.
Exactly. It's a living document that is constantly being edited, restructured, and argued over based on new information. And it's not authored by just one person in isolation. It has multiple contributors.
So in the context of personal identity, those contributors would be your family, your coworkers, the culture you live in.
Yes. They are providing input. They're challenging your definitions. And wait, I promised myself I wouldn't just agree with everything today, but yes, that's exactly it.
It makes sense. They're the other editors.
Right. And sometimes you try to add a new paragraph to your identity, like, I don't know, deciding you are now an outdoorsy rock climber. But your friends, the other editors, they reject that edit because it just doesn't fit the rest of the page.
There's an editing war.
Exactly. Sometimes there's a war where your professional identity clashes with your political identity. And most importantly, if you look at the page's history tab, the identity of the person at age 20 reads completely differently than the identity at age 40.
I really like that. The Wikipedia analogy highlights the provisional nature of the self perfectly. Think about an adolescent running through rapid behavioral changes.
Oh, yeah. It's exhausting just to watch.
Right. One semester, they are the brooding poet, dressing in black, adopting this cynical worldview, and then 6 months later, they join the debate team, wear blazers, and become obsessed with municipal policy.
And the old Ericksonian model would view that as a failure, right? Like extreme role confusion, the marble statue is cracking.
Yes, it would be viewed as a severe crisis. But the socially situated model views that as absolutely necessary beta testing.
Beta testing.
Yeah, they're drafting new sections on the page, pushing it live, and seeing how the server, which is society, responds. The feedback they get from their peers and parents dictates which edits are kept and which are reverted.
Man, that takes a massive amount of pressure off, doesn't it? If you realize you are a living document rather than a fragile statue, you don't have to panic when you feel internally inconsistent.
It's a very freeing perspective.
But it does raise a mechanical question for me. If our identity is this ongoing editing process, how do we actually execute those edits? Like, how do we make the jump from trying out the brooding poet to actually committing to the debate nerd?
That transition requires looking at the mechanics of choice. And this is where developmental psychologist James Marcia mapped things out brilliantly.
Okay, what did he do?
He took Erickson's broad, somewhat philosophical concept of the identity crisis and turned it into an empirical, measurable framework. He argued that the identity process essentially boils down to two variables.
Exploration and commitment, right?
Exactly. Exploration and commitment.
Then we'll make sure I have this right. So exploration is the active gathering of data, trying out the different outfits, taking the weird elective classes, reading up on different religions.
Yes, playing the field of life, essentially.
Right. And commitment is the act of actually deciding, putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is what I value, this is what I am doing.
That is the core of it. And by cross-referencing those two variables, so high or low exploration and high or low commitment, Marcia identified 4 distinct identity statuses.
Status is not stages, right?
These aren't necessarily stages you graduate through chronologically like levels in a video game. They are states of being that describe how you are managing your identity at any given moment.
Okay, well, I found myself immediately self-diagnosing as I read through these. The first one is identity diffusion. This is basically the baseline, right? Low exploration, low commitment.
Yes. The defining characteristic of diffusion is a lack of direction paired with an absolute absence of anxiety about that lack of direction.
So they aren't even stressed about it.
Nope. This is someone who isn't actively looking into career options, isn't questioning their inherited belief systems, and hasn't committed to any particular path. They are simply floating.
They aren't editing the Wikipedia page at all. They're just leaving it blank.
Exactly. Now, the second status shifts the exploration variable to high, but keeps commitment low. This is called moratorium.
Oh, moratorium. This is the perpetual student, right?
It very often is, yes.
The person who changes their major 6 times, backpacks across a different continent every summer to find themselves, and constantly dates new people but bolts the second things get serious.
Yes, they are gathering infinite data but refusing to make a choice. It is a state characterized by high cognitive activity and, unlike diffusion, very often high anxiety.
Because they know they have to choose eventually.
Right. You are acutely aware that a choice must be made, but the act of committing feels like a trap.
I feel like modern society pushes a massive percentage of the population into a prolonged, sometimes permanent state of moratorium.
How so?
Well, think about the sheer volume of choices we have compared to our grandparents.
Yeah.
100 years ago, geography basically dictated your destiny. You had maybe 3 viable career paths, a tiny dating pool in your town, and one dominant cultural narrative.
The parameters were incredibly narrow, which essentially forced commitment.
Exactly. But today, the parameters are effectively infinite. You have a glowing rectangle in your pocket that shows you how 3 million other people are living completely different lives.
You can see all the possibilities at once.
Right. You can be a digital nomad in Bali, a corporate banker in London, an organic farmer in Oregon. The paradox of choice kicks in hard. If committing to one identity means closing the door on 1,000 other potentially amazing identities, the brain just short circuits.
We stay in moratorium because committing feels like a massive loss of potential.
Exactly. It's paralyzing.
The friction of unlimited choice is a profound modern stressor, absolutely. But let's look at the third status, which is kind of the mirror image of moratorium. This is high commitment but low exploration. It's called identity foreclosure.
Oh man, this one fascinated me. Foreclosure is when you adopt an identity without ever doing the work of questioning it, right?
Yes, and it often looks like tremendous success from the outside. A foreclosed individual bypasses the anxiety of the crisis entirely. They just adopt a ready-made identity handed down by their parents, their religious community, or their culture.
It's the kid who comes from a family of lawyers, so at age 12, they just internalize, I'm gonna be a lawyer. They never explore art or science or trade school. They just boot up the pre-installed operating system and run it.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Honestly, my first reaction to reading about foreclosure was jealousy. It sounds so peaceful. No anxiety, no endless searching. You just take the script you were handed and read your lines. Why is that considered a problem in the psychological literature?
Because an unexamined identity is exceptionally fragile.
Fragile.
Yes. It works perfectly fine as long as the environment remains completely static. But the moment a foreclosed individual encounters a major disruption, say a shift in culture, a personal tragedy, or simply meeting someone who operates on a radically different set of values, the whole framework shatters.
It's like running that pre-installed operating system. But suddenly the world demands you use Linux, and you have absolutely no idea how the underlying code actually works because you never built it yourself.
A very apt technical analogy.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the fourth and final status, which is the developmental ideal. Identity achievement.
High exploration, high commitment.
Yes. This represents high exploration followed by high commitment. You put in the grueling work of moratorium, you sifted through the data, experienced the anxiety, and then you made an autonomous, conscious choice. You wrote your own code.
But, and I think this is the most important part, once you reach identity achievement, you aren't just done forever, right?
No, absolutely not. What longitudinal studies reveal is that identity achievement is not a permanent destination. Life forces you to cycle through these statuses repeatedly.
Right.
A divorce, a sudden career loss, or moving to a foreign country. can instantly throw an identity-achieved adult right back into moratorium or even diffusion.
You get laid off from a 20-year career and suddenly your Wikipedia page is blanked out and the editing process starts all over again.
Exactly.
But, this editing process, this cycling through statuses, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. The options we explore and the commitments we make are largely dictated by the tribes we belong to.
Which necessitates a pivot from the internal mechanics of choice to the external pressures of group dynamics. The psychological literature on how groups forge the individual self is honestly startling.
Startling is exactly the right word. We have to dive into social identity theory, specifically the work of Henri Tajfel and John Turner from the 1970s. Because when I read about their experiments, I actually had to go back and reread the methodology to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. It sounds absurd.
You're referring to the minimal group paradigm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Tajfel wants to understand the baseline conditions for prejudice and tribalism. He wants to know, what is the absolute bare minimum requirement for human beings to form an us and start actively discriminating against them?
Right. Does it require a history of bloodshed? Does it require competition over scarce resources like water or land?
Exactly. The hypothesis before Tajfel was that intergroup hostility required some form of rational conflict of interest, didn't it?
It did. But Tajfel brings participants into a laboratory and strips all of that away. He divides them into groups using criteria so meaningless it borders on comedy.
Okay, tell them about the paintings.
In the most famous iteration, he shows the participants abstract paintings by Paul Klee and Wassily Kandinsky. Now, unless you are an art historian, these are just colorful geometric shapes.
Right.
He asks the participants which they prefer, and based on that completely arbitrary preference, he divides them. You are in the Klee group, you are in the Kandinsky group.
And in some variations, didn't he literally just flip a coin?
Yes. He literally flipped a coin in front of them. Heads, you are group A. Tails, you are group B.
So these groups have zero shared history. They have no shared values. The participants don't even know who else is in their group. It is the definition of a meaningless categorization.
Completely meaningless.
But then Tajfel asks them to distribute small amounts of money to anonymous members of both groups. And what happens?
The moment the categorization occurs, reason just vanishes. The participants consistently display intense in-group favoritism.
Over a coin flip.
Over a coin flip. The Klee fans allocate significantly more money to anonymous Klee fans, and they actively penalize the Kandinsky fans.
Wait, I need to emphasize the craziest part of the data here, because it's not just that they want their group to get the most money possible, right?
No, it's worse.
The participants actively chose allocation matrices where their own group received less absolute money as long as it maximized the difference between them and the outgroup.
Yes. They would sacrifice their own absolute gain just to ensure they beat the other side by a wider margin. They would rather take $2 while the outgroup gets $1 than take $10 if it meant the outgroup received $9.
That is irrational behavior on a staggering level. Why does the brain do that? How does being randomly assigned to Group A instantly rewire our decision-making like that?
Tajfel and Turner propose that the mechanism driving this is self-esteem maintenance. The theory states that a massive portion of your self-concept is derived directly from your group memberships. Therefore, your personal self-esteem is inextricably tied to the status of your group.
So if my group is superior, I am superior.
Precisely. Or rather, the cognitive logic dictates that. We possess a deep evolutionary drive for positive distinctiveness.
Meaning we need to feel special.
Right. For hundreds of thousands of years of human history, survival depended on belonging to a strong, high-status tribe. If your tribe was weak, you died. The modern brain still runs that evolutionary hardware.
So when you are assigned to the Klee group, your brain instantly registers, this is my tribe. My psychological survival depends on this tribe being better than the Kandinsky tribe.
That's exactly what's happening beneath the surface.
I was trying to find a good analogy for this in everyday life, and my mind immediately went to air travel. Have you ever noticed the psychological warfare that happens at an airport boarding gate?
I can't say I've ever viewed it as warfare, but go on.
Think about it. You are sitting at the gate with 200 random strangers. You have absolutely nothing in common. But then the gate agent announces, we are now boarding Zone 1.
Okay.
Suddenly, the people whose boarding passes say Zone 1 stand up, and the psychological shift is palpable. The Zone 1 people look at the Zone 3 people who are still sitting down, and there is this microscopic feeling of superiority. I am a Zone 1, I am efficient, I am elite.
And the people sitting down.
The Zone 3 people look at the Zone 1 people with this simmering, irrational resentment. You have been categorized by an airline algorithm and your brain instantly adopts it as an identity.
That is actually a perfect low-stakes illustration of the minimal group paradigm. The categorization is arbitrary, but the psychological consequences are real. Now, extrapolate that mechanism out to the macro level.
Oh, wow, yeah. If we will sacrifice absolute gains just to beat the outgroup over a coin flip or a boarding zone, what happens when the categorization is based on something we actually care about, like politics or religion or nationality?
The implications are deeply unsettling. It explains the sheer intractability of modern polarized discourse.
It really does.
When you observe two political factions arguing over, say, an economic policy, they are rarely engaging with the actual data. The policy is just a proxy war. What they're actually fighting for is self-esteem maintenance.
Right, because to concede a point to the outgroup isn't just admitting a mathematical error. It feels like an existential threat to their identity.
Because if my political tribe is wrong, my tribe loses status. And if my tribe loses status, my personal self-esteem crashes.
So my brain will perform Olympic-level cognitive gymnastics to justify why my side is right, completely independently of the facts.
The cognitive drive to protect the in-group overrides objective reasoning almost every single time.
Okay, this is making my head spin slightly. Let's recap. We've established that I am constantly shifting through identity statuses from moratorium to achievement and back again.
Yes.
And we've established that my self-concept is tethered to various social groups that I can cycle in or out of depending on the context. So, if my identity is this incredibly fluid, fragmented, socially contingent thing, how do I possibly wake up every morning feeling like the same person? I don't feel like a random collection of boarding zones and Wikipedia edits. I feel like one continuous me.
That feeling of continuity is perhaps the most impressive trick the human brain pulls off, and it is entirely reliant on the mechanics of storytelling.
The narrative self, right? Dan McAdams' work.
Yes, Dan McAdams, Northwestern University. He revolutionized how we understand continuity of self. He argues that identity is not a substance you possess, it is a narrative achievement.
A narrative achievement. I love that phrasing.
To maintain sanity, the human brain essentially acts as an internal biographer. It takes the chaotic, fragmented, often contradictory experiences of your past, your current circumstances, and your imagined future, and weaves them together into a coherent plotline.
So you author a story that makes it look like it was a logical, continuous journey all along, even when it totally wasn't. But to write a story, you need source material. And the source material for our internal biography is our memory.
Which introduces a massive layer of complexity, because human memory is not a reliable archival system.
Right. Memory isn't a hard drive where you save a video file and play it back perfectly 10 years later. Memory is reconstructive.
It is. The neurobiology shows us that every time you recall an event, you aren't just retrieving it, your brain is actively rebuilding it in real time.
You pull fragments of sensory data and fill in the gaps based on your current emotional state.
Which leads researchers to conclude that the personal narrative is doubly constructed.
Doubly constructed. Break that down for me.
Well, the first layer of construction is the overarching story you choose to tell about your life. The second layer is that the very building blocks of that story, your memories, are themselves actively constructed and edited by your brain to fit the narrative you need today.
Man, you are building a house out of bricks that change shape every time you look at them.
That's exactly it.
That sounds like we are all just walking around trapped in a hallucination of our own making. It's a little terrifying.
It sounds precarious, yes. But McAdams' research emphasizes that just because the narrative is constructed doesn't mean it is false or useless. It's an evolutionary adaptation.
How so?
The specific type of story you choose to tell about your reconstructed memories has profound, measurable impacts on your psychological well-being.
He categorized these narrative arcs, didn't he? The ones that really stuck out to me in the reading were the sequences. Contamination versus redemption.
Those are the most critical predictors of resilience, absolutely. A contamination sequence is a narrative framing where a positive experience is ultimately ruined by a negative ending.
Okay.
The subject frames the story so that the bad outcome retroactively poisons the good that came before it.
Give me a real-world example of that. Let's look at something deeply destabilizing, like a massive career failure. Let's say a startup founder spends 5 years building a company and then it goes bankrupt.
Okay, so a founder writing a contamination sequence will look back at those 5 years and narrate it as a total waste. I sacrificed my 20s, I missed my family, I poured my soul into that company, and it failed. Therefore, I am a failure, the market is rigged, and the joy I felt building the product was just naive delusion.
Oh, wow. The narrative is one of permanent loss and victimhood,
Exactly.
and that person will carry that heavy, cynical identity into every future job interview and relationship. But a redemption sequence flips the script on the exact same objective facts.
It does. A redemption sequence is an arc where suffering, failure, or trauma is narratively framed as the necessary catalyst for growth, learning, or a greater good.
So the same founder goes bankrupt,
Right.
but they write a redemption sequence instead.
Right. Losing the company was devastating. It crushed me. But the crucible of that bankruptcy forced me to learn how to manage risk. It showed me who my real friends were, and it gave me the humility I needed to succeed in my next venture.
The objective facts, 5 years of work, 0 financial return, they remain identical. But the identity generated from those facts is entirely different.
It's totally transformed. McAdams' longitudinal data demonstrates that individuals who instinctively frame their lives through redemption sequences exhibit significantly higher levels of life satisfaction, mental health, and civic engagement.
So the story isn't an illusion, it's the operating system. It dictates how you process the future.
Yes.
But what happens when your internal operating system is suddenly forced to interface with a completely different external reality?
This is where the internal narrative meets the macro forces of globalization and migration. What happens when your story has to be translated into a new cultural script?
This is John Barry's work on acculturation, right? Because we aren't just navigating our own memories. Millions of people are navigating multiple cultural identities simultaneously.
Yes, Barry developed a framework to understand how individuals manage the collision between their heritage culture, so the culture they were born into or raised with, and the majority culture they currently live in.
Think of an immigrant moving from rural Mexico to New York City, or an international student from China attending a university in London.
Exactly. Barry identified 4 primary strategies for managing this immense psychological load.
The first one is assimilation. This is the melting pot ideal that a lot of countries use to explicitly demand, right? Leave your old self at the border.
Assimilation occurs when an individual actively rejects or loses their heritage culture and fully adopts the norms, values, and identity of the majority culture. They might refuse to speak their native language or even change their name to blend in.
While that might reduce friction with the majority society, the psychological cost of amputating a core part of your narrative has to be massive.
It is. The second strategy is separation, which is the inverse. The individual fiercely maintains their heritage culture, but completely avoids interaction with the majority culture, often retreating into isolated enclaves.
And I imagine that leads to a lot of economic and social marginalization.
It does, which leads to the third and most psychologically damaging strategy, marginalization.
That's where you don't fit anywhere, right?
Right. This is when an individual loses connection with their heritage culture, but also feels rejected by or unable to participate in the majority culture. They belong nowhere. They're culturally untethered, which correlates with severe anxiety and depression.
But there is a fourth path, which Barry's data shows is the psychological gold standard, integration.
Integration is the capacity to maintain your heritage cultural identity while simultaneously participating fully in the larger society. It requires biculturalism.
Biculturalism, the ability to hold 2 realities in your head at once.
Yes, and research by psychologist Carmit Tadmore has shown that bicultural integration provides distinct cognitive advantages. When you successfully manage 2 cultural frameworks, you develop a trait called integrative complexity.
Integrative complexity. Let me see if I grasp this. If I only ever grow up in one culture, I assume my culture's rules, say, about how to respect elders or how to view time and punctuality, are just objective laws of physics.
Right, you think it's just the way the world works.
But if I am bicultural, I understand that there are multiple equally valid ways to interpret the exact same situation.
Exactly. You realize the rules are just scripts. This constant cognitive toggling between cultural scripts strengthens the brain's executive function.
Wow.
Bicultural individuals consistently score higher on tests of creative problem solving and perspective taking because they do not suffer from rigid single-track thinking.
Which naturally brings us to language, because language is the ultimate delivery mechanism for a culture. It's not just a tool for asking where the bathroom is, it is the carrier of the cultural narrative.
Bonnie Norton's investment theory of language learning is critical here. Historically, we thought about learning a second language as a purely cognitive task, like memorizing math formulas.
But Norton showed that language acquisition is deeply tied to identity.
Yes. inextricably.
I really want to emphasize this for anyone listening who is currently learning a second language, maybe even using this deep dive to practice their English right now. You aren't just downloading a mental dictionary. You are actively trying on a new persona.
You really are.
It alters your physical presentation. You might find your voice drops half an octave, your hand gestures change, you become more direct or more deferential depending on the cultural weight of the language.
You are expanding the boundaries of the self. Norton argued that a learner will invest the immense cognitive effort required to acquire a new language only to the extent that they believe the language will enhance their identity and increase their cultural capital.
Oh, so if I believe learning French will make me a more sophisticated, globally connected version of myself, my brain just opens the gates.
Yes, the motivation is identity-driven.
But Norton also found the inverse, right? If the language threatens your identity, acquisition stops.
If the language you are trying to learn belongs to a dominant group that actively discriminates against your heritage group, or if speaking it makes you feel like a traitor to your roots, your psychological defenses activate.
Wow.
The brain essentially builds a firewall against the language to protect the core identity.
Okay, so expanding your identity through integration and language is a superpower. It builds integrative complexity. But, and this is where the research gets incredibly sobering, society does not always welcome that expansion. Sometimes, the external environment actively attacks your identity.
We must address the friction of social categorization. What happens when the categories placed upon you are designed to demean or limit your potential?
We need to talk about stereotype threat, the research by Claude Steele. When I first read these studies, they genuinely changed how I view human performance. What exactly is stereotype threat?
Stereotype threat is the situational apprehension that a person experiences when they feel they are at risk of confirming a negative stereotype about their social group.
Okay.
It is the psychological weight of knowing that other people in the room are viewing you through a prejudiced lens.
And Steele proved that this isn't just a vague feeling of discomfort, it actually destroys cognitive performance.
The experimental design is incredibly elegant. In one of the foundational studies, Steele and his colleagues brought black and white college students into a laboratory and administered a highly difficult verbal exam composed of questions from the graduate record examination, the GRE.
High stakes, intensely difficult cognitive work.
Very high stakes. In the control condition, the researchers framed the test benignly. They told the students, this is not a diagnostic test of your inherent intellectual ability. It is simply a laboratory problem-solving task. We are just studying how people solve puzzles.
Okay, so they removed the pressure, and what were the results?
Under those non-threatening conditions, the black students and the white students performed identically. There was no racial gap in performance whatsoever.
Identical performance, the cognitive baseline was equal.
Yes, but in the experimental condition, they gave the exact same test to a different cohort of students, and they changed a single sentence in the instructions.
Just one sentence.
Just one. They told the students, this is a diagnostic test of your inherent academic and verbal intelligence.
Wow, they raised the stakes. By making it a test of intelligence, they inadvertently activated the pernicious ambient cultural stereotype in American society regarding black individuals and intellectual ability.
Exactly. And by simply framing the test as diagnostic of ability, the black students performed significantly worse than the white students and significantly worse than the black students in the control group.
The exact same questions, the exact same baseline intelligence. The only difference was a few words of instruction that altered the psychological atmosphere of the room. How does the brain physically betray the student in that moment?
It is a crisis of cognitive load. Your brain's working memory is finite. It is like the RAM in a computer. To solve a complex GRE logic puzzle, you need 100% of your RAM dedicated to the task.
But when stereotype threat is activated, a background application boots up.
And it is a massive resource-heavy application. It is an internal monologue of panic. Am I confirming the stereotype? If I fail this question, am I proving them right? Is the proctor judging me? Am I letting down my entire group?
It's like trying to play a high-speed video game, but a pop-up ad keeps covering half the screen, demanding your attention. You don't have 100% of your RAM anymore, you have 60%.
Exact.
The anxiety is literally siphoning off the processing power needed to solve the problem, thereby causing the exact failure that the stereotype predicted.
It is a self-fulfilling prophecy engineered by environmental friction. Steele replicated this across numerous domains. He brought in men and women who were exceptionally gifted at mathematics and gave them an advanced calculus test.
Let me guess. When they activated the stereotype that women are worse at math, the women's scores plummeted.
Yes. When they simply told the participants, this test has shown gender differences in the past, the women dramatically underperformed relative to the men. But when they explicitly stated this specific test has been proven to have absolutely no gender differences, the threat was lifted.
The working memory was freed up.
And the women matched the men perfectly.
The most crucial takeaway here is that the performance deficit is not a trait of the individual. It is a symptom of the environment. Think about the implications for corporate boardrooms or universities or medical schools. How much human brilliance is just being vaporized by the cognitive friction of having to prove you belong in the room?
The societal cost is incalculable. And unfortunately, this brings us to an environment where the friction of identity management is currently operating at an unprecedented global scale, an environment that essentially weaponizes the performance of the self.
We've talked about classrooms and test centers, but today the most aggressive arena for identity construction is the glowing rectangle in our pockets, the digital stage.
To properly analyze digital identity, sociological research relies heavily on a theorist from 1959, Erving Goffman, and his seminal work, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Long before the internet, Goffman developed the dramaturgical account of human interaction.
The dramaturgical account.
Yeah.
All the world is a stage, and we are merely players.
Quite literally. Goffman argued that all social life is a theatrical performance. We are constantly managing the impressions we give off to others. He divided human behavior into front stage and backstage.
Okay, front stage is me at a networking event. I am wearing a suit, I am monitoring my posture, I am modulating my voice to sound competent and engaging, I am highly aware of the audience, and I am performing a specific identity.
And the backstage is what happens when you go home, close your apartment door, and collapse on the couch.
Right.
You take off the suit, put on sweatpants, and drop the posture.
Yeah.
You are no longer managing an impression. You are resting the machinery of the self.
Everyone has a front stage and a backstage. That is just the baseline requirement for living in a society. But how does Goffman's 1959 theory mutate when we apply it to social media?
The mechanics remain the same, but the scale of the performance has exploded. For almost all of human history, your front stage performance was restricted by geography and time. Your audience was maybe 50 people in your village, and the performance ended when you walked away.
Today, the stage is infinite. Your audience is potentially millions of people. The performance is asynchronous, like people are watching you while you sleep. And the tools we have to manipulate the front stage are vastly more powerful.
You can filter, edit, crop, and hyper-curate your presentation. You extract only the most glamorous, successful fractions of a second from your life and aggregate them into a seamless digital avatar.
I was trying to think of an analogy for this, and it's like we are all acting as the PR agency for a celebrity client, but the client is ourselves.
That's a great way to put it.
We are constantly issuing press releases about our vacations, our promotions, our perfectly plated dinners, but simultaneously, we are the intern doing the exhausted crisis management in the back room.
The psychological danger arises from the discrepancy between those two roles. The data linking heavy social media use to anxiety and depression is robust, and the primary driver is upward social comparison.
Because I am sitting in my messy backstage reality. I feel anxious, I haven't showered, I'm worried about paying my rent, and I open my phone, and I am instantly bombarded with the highly curated front stage performances of 500 of my peers.
Even though your rational brain knows they also have a messy backstage, the visceral emotional impact of their pristine front stage triggers the self-esteem maintenance mechanisms we discussed earlier.
Right, the Tajfel stuff.
Yes, you feel your relative status dropping, which registers cognitively as a threat.
This inevitably leads to the massive cultural debate about authenticity. People are constantly complaining that social media is toxic because it's fake and that we need to return to being our authentic selves online. But based on everything we've discussed today, from reconstructive memory to Goffman's theatrical stages, isn't the idea of a single, unvarnished, authentic self kind of a myth anyway?
It is a fundamental misframing of sociological reality. The literature establishes that all self-presentation is contextual. You are not being inauthentic when you act differently with your grandmother than you do with your romantic partner. You are adapting to the social script. A curated Instagram feed is not inherently a lie. It is just a highly specific front stage context.
So the problem isn't that we are performing. The problem is the director of the play.
Explain that.
Well, if I perform at a dinner party, the feedback I get is human. Smiles, frowns, conversation. But on a digital platform, the director grading my performance is a machine learning algorithm designed to maximize engagement and advertising revenue. The algorithm acts like a funhouse mirror. It rewards extreme emotion, it rewards outrage, hypersexuality, or unrealistic wealth displays.
And because humans are desperate for social validation, because we need that positive feedback to edit our Wikipedia page, we adapt our performance to please the algorithmic director.
That is the truly terrifying part. The algorithm exerts a selection pressure on human identity. If I am naturally a nuanced, calm person, but I notice that the only time I get social validation online is when I perform blistering, cynical outrage. Eventually, I am going to start performing outrage more often.
Yes, you adapt to the incentives.
And because my identity is a narrative I construct through repetition, doesn't that performance eventually bleed into my actual backstage reality?
The boundary between the front stage and the backstage dissolves. You become the mask you repeatedly put on for the machine. This is why understanding the mechanics of identity formation is not just an abstract academic exercise. It is a critical survival skill for navigating modern consciousness.
Man, what a massive landscape we have covered today. We started by taking a sledgehammer to the marble statue of the true self, revealing that identity is actually an endlessly revised Wikipedia page. We explored Marcia's mechanics of choice, the danger of foreclosure, and the anxiety of endless moratorium.
We examine the evolutionary hardware of social identity theory, where arbitrary boundaries like boarding zones in abstract art can drive us to irrational tribalism just to protect our self-esteem.
We met the internal storyteller and saw how we construct our reality using the faulty bricks of reconstructive memory, choosing between arcs of contamination or redemption. We discussed the cognitive tax of stereotype threat, and finally, the infinite algorithmic pressure cooker of the digital front stage.
The architecture of the self is breathtakingly complex. But the most practical application of all this data is self-reflection. I would encourage anyone listening to audit their own identity statuses.
Where in your life are you foreclosed? What beliefs are you running on a pre-installed operating system simply because you've never challenged them? And conversely, where are you paralyzed and moratorium, terrified to make a commitment?
It's worth asking yourself those questions.
And as you run that audit, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to turn over in your mind. We talked heavily about how memory is reconstructive, and how your identity today is just a story you are telling yourself based on those shifting memories.
Right.
If that is true, think about what it implies for the future. The future you who looks back at the present you 10 or 20 years from now, they are going to view you as an entirely different character. They are going to reconstruct the memory of who you are right now, editing your current thoughts and actions to fit whatever narrative arc they need to survive in their future.
That's a wild thought.
That thought might induce a little vertigo at first, but honestly, it is the most profoundly liberating realization of this entire deep dive. If your identity isn't a fixed, heavy block of marble, it means you are not trapped by your past. You are not permanently defined by your previous mistakes, the tribes you blindly joined, or the algorithmic masks you've worn. You are an active construction site, which means you possess the ultimate, undeniable freedom to pick up the pen, rewrite your script, and lay down a completely new foundation starting right now.
The narrative is yours to author.
Keep exploring, keep writing, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.